Hi, welcome to Dreams Recycled podcast, where we talk to people who have managed the impossible to recycle their life into something bigger, better after divorce or after some kind of adversity. Today, I'm very excited to have a special guest who is a friend of mine that I met through LinkedIn, believe it or not. His name is Kenny Weiss, and he is a coach and speaker and is an expert in many different forms of coaching. So, Kenny, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, Tiffany. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to get to share a little bit about what I do.
Well, we're excited to have you because I think one of the things that you are an expert on is something that many of us after our divorce struggle with, which is, the patterns that we get ourselves into that we struggle so hard to get out of and even so hard to recognize. Yeah. So to just start by talking about one of those, let's talk a little bit about love addiction. Can you tell our audience what it is for some people who actually probably don't even know that that's an actual thing?
Yeah, well, what's shocking to most people is that almost every single relationship out there is a love addicted, love avoidant relationship. That's why they don't work. We're really taught through movie, through TV, through song and book. Every example we've ever seen of love is actually massive codependency. It's not love. And so what happens in love addiction is you have basically two roles. You have the avoidant and the addict. And the avoidant, they'll initially start off, they're the one with power. They seduce through intellect, through money, through sex. It's a power position. And the addict is like, oh my God, this man or woman's a savior. They're so smart. They have so much together. And
they usually then they would usually be like maybe the alpha person in the relationship, the chaser maybe.
The addict is the chaser.
Okay, the addict is the chaser, and the voider is the attractor.
Yes, the avoidant. The key to the avoidant is they always have something more important going on outside of the relationship. With women, it's primarily work, kids, illness. Some sort of injury or illness. And then they will tend to pursue an emotional affair with a man outside of it. No sex, but he's just a great friend. And so they tell all their intimate details to this best male friend that they won't tell to their spouse or partner.
Right.
Now,
so is that a bit like a work husband or a work wife?
Exactly.
I think almost everyone has one of those, right?
Exactly. And so a male will primarily do it through activities. They'll use work as well. They will have a sexual affair outside of the relationship. And so what happens is it's hard for the addict. They're going, I want more time and attention from you. And the avoidant goes, well, I just love our kids. I have to take care of them. I mean, it sounds incredibly plausible. Or the husband like, look, honey, I'm working my tail off so we can afford all this stuff. It looks like it's incredibly legitimate. There's nothing to argue with, but yet the reason they do it is their primary fear is intimacy. And their secondary fear is abandonment, while with the addict, it's completely the opposite. Their primary fear is abandonment. Their secondary fear is intimacy.
Right, which is why the addict is so clingy, right?
Exactly.
They cling and they needy, clingy, wanty, as I like to call them.
Yes. They basically give up all of their pursuits. Once they meet this person, they'll stop hanging out with their friends, their hobbies, all of it, because now the avoidant is so popular and it means so much to them. They sacrifice everything to chase them. And the avoidant loves the attention. It gives them power. But at some point, it becomes too much and they turn away from it.
Right. And so for the addict, really, instead of, using alcohol or food or drugs, they're basically addicted to another human or the way that person makes them feel.
In a lot of cases, the love addict will also have outside addictions. That's a hallmark of it too. This is just another one of their addictions.
Right.
They may lower those as they pursue this relationship, and trying to get the love avoidant to pay attention to them.
So how healthy is that though? Because I want to say I'm a little bit guilty of that. Some of it, a little bit here and there, maybe in the past. How do you break that pattern? How do you realize that the people you're being attracted to are not healthy for you, or you with them in that combination are not healthy? What steps can you take along the way to kind of break that cycle? Obviously, you need to recognize you're in that cycle would be step one. Then how do you go about getting out of it?
Well, first of all, I'm both. I'm a complete nightmare in a relationship. I'm crazy. So it's all of us. Even though I know all about this, doesn't mean I'm perfect at it.
Right.
But the biggest difficulty that people have in this, in either side of the dynamic, is they think it's the other person. The bottom line is this: whoever you pick is always a mirror into your issue. And that's the biggest stumbling block with either side of this dynamic, is they think the other side is the problem. But the reason you pick them is because they are there to show you what you need to work on. I can literally put somebody in a room with 10,000 people, all of them completely perfect for them. They will go past all of them. The only one they'll be attracted to is the opposite side of their dynamic. They will literally, like radar, move right towards them.
So they're like a mirror image of each other's issues, which goes along with what Dreams Recycled we talk about a lot, about you attract what you are. Yeah. And so we really, really like advocate a lot, and I think you probably do too, that after your divorce, you really need to work on yourself, right? To recognize how you are as a person before you even attempt to have a relationship with anyone else or be attracted to anyone else.
Yeah. I don't care what happened in a divorce, you played a part in it because you picked them. You said yes. So Correct. You're responsible for that. That started with you. At any point, you could have walked away and said no, and you didn't. And that's what you have to find out is, why didn't I do that? That's about me. It has nothing to do with them. Because even dating, they showed us who they were. We chose to ignore it.
Correct. And yeah, that's actually really interesting because I discuss this a lot. So over the course of my work with Dreams Recycled, I've spoken personally to over 6,000 divorcees, which is a lot, clearly. And the more I speak to the people, everyone, not everyone, because that's an exaggeration, but an awful lot of times, tell me about your ex. My ex is crazy. It's the first thing they say, and you go, really? All 6,000 of you actually have to have crazy exes? Well, this probably isn't true, right? Yeah. But I think the thing that I've learned more than anything talking to this many people is we all do know the issues. Unless you go on a first date and end up at the Elvis Chapel in Vegas and marry this person, we all date these people before, and we do recognize on some kind of level, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, the issues and the red flags, but we choose to ignore them. One of the very common conversations I have kind of goes like, well, tell me about your ex. And then there's this kind of long litany of all their issues. And I say, wow, did these emerge, 10 years into your marriage or 20 years into your marriage? And the answer is always, oh no, I knew they were like that when I married them. Yeah. Right. And so how do we stop those second time around? Like people who are now ready, we've worked on ourselves, like me, lots of work on myself, like we've worked on ourselves, and now we're ready to, get into a more serious relationship. You've been divorced X amount of years. So how do we kind of make sure that we're not going to enter the same relationship again with Mr. X or Mrs. Y, who's the same as our past spouses?
Well, there are a couple of keys. One is most people just kind of bounce around going, I wonder when I'll find him. You literally need to sit down and detail out. I want 6'1", blonde hair, blue eyes. He has this career. He does this for, detail. He likes this. He doesn't like that. He's close with his family. He hates his family. Whatever it is, your brain will go after what you think about and what you ultimately want. If you give it no picture, you will pick the exact same thing. So you need to define what your needs and wants are. And most people, they'll put down 5 or 10 things. I'm talking pages. This is a manifesto that you're constantly adding to. You're out with a girlfriend and you see some guy do something really sweet and you go, oh my God, that's got to get on the list. He always takes my chair out. That's something I want. your brain will then, because you'll walk in a room and you'll see basically a mirror image of your ex, and you'll see it. You'll go, oh my God, he didn't pull out the chair. Yeah, I don't want him.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see it. But if you don't detail out what your needs and wants are, you'll end up right back where you were.
Well, I have to say I did not believe in this theory until recently. The whole manifesting and dating with intent, X, Y, and Z. But I really have, over the last year, it's actually what I did. I completely stopped dating. I was like, okay, I'm done. This is not working for me. Like, I'm not dating anyone. I'm not going to go near anyone, being the dramatic version that I am of myself. And so I was like, okay, what do I actually want? And I literally made a list. I spoke at a manifesting conference for women in like March 2016, and I listened to all these women, and I was like on the fence. I was like, what is all this stuff going on here? But the more I listened, the more I started to think, I think this is true, that thoughts become things. And the more you set that out and you make your list, and I don't have, it's not like 20 pages, but it is quite extensive. And my list also shifted to, instead of, these kind of more superficial things, the more kind of steadfast things. Looks don't last. Health doesn't necessarily last. Money doesn't necessarily last. Even very, successful people, businesses can go bankrupt. And so I kind of I started to think more like, okay, if I was stuck in a room or a desert island, who would I want to be stuck with? And I kind of made my own personal list from this kind of theory. Like if you really did keep all your vows in sickness and health and richness and poorness or whatever it is, who would you end up picking? And that's a lot of what's on my personal list. And since I've had that list and been dating with intent, my personal life is much better than it used to be.
Here's the other part of the list that I don't hear people mention is you also need to list who you want to be in the relationship.
That's a good point.
And nobody thinks about that because, again, they're projecting, I need this person. This is the hallmark of love addiction, love avoidance, and codependency. I need them to be this so that I feel okay inside. They will fill this hole that I have. And so we focus on what they will give to us. But who are you going to be? What type of wife or husband or boyfriend? You mentioned the deserted island. How are you going to behave towards them when they are, miserable and feeling trapped by the island? How are you going to react to that? If you don't have that list in place of the type of person you want to be, that's the bigger key. Until you find that, and that's you said the recovery after a relationship. The relationship ultimately failed because two people chose to make it fail. And your part was not figuring out who you wanted to be in that relationship. And what happens is on both sides is they end up saying yes to things that they don't agree to, that go against their morals and values and their needs and wants. And then they blame the other person. How many times in a relationship have you or your friend said, I've been doing this, this, and this, and he or she won't give me this? Well, if you have ever said that, ever, you used your yes, in other words, I'll do these things for you, to manipulate them to get this over here. And that's how most relationships are. That's not love. That's codependency. That's manipulation. What you have to learn is how to say no.
I was going to say, learn to say no, but also, the reality is that when you do get married or even just in a regular relationship, there is a certain amount of compromise, so I think there's a fine line between using that as a manipulation tool and just the reality of life that any two humans put together probably can't agree on every single little thing, right?
But here's the thing. If those lists are there, you wouldn't have married them. Because if it's a non-negotiable item, like I split my list into non-negotiable and non-negotiable. Drugs of any kind is non-negotiable. Someone thinks smoking pot here and there is fine. It doesn't work for me. I'm an addict. I can't be around it. I can't have that in my life. So that would not pop up in the marriage. Or if it did, I'm gone.
Right.
I will not accept it. I will not negotiate that or compromise on that. I don't care how far along we are in the marriage. That's not okay with me. And that's what people do is they take things like, they don't know what their non-negotiables are. It happens in the marriage, and now they go, what am I going to do? Well, if it's not on your list, that's why you ended up there.
But I agree with you, not the minutiae of life, like do you want sushi or pizza? Clearly you have to figure that out. But the really big things, I agree.
Give me an example. What would you say is an example
of non-negotiable?
Or, well, you said, because I think your point is you get surprised in a relationship and you have to compromise. So give me a scenario, and it might be easier for me to explain how I would help, coach somebody, a couple, through that situation.
Well, I would say obviously the really big things, like you said, like, are you going to have sex with other people in your marriage? You have to kind of figure that out beforehand. That's not negotiable, right? Once you do it. Well, like you said, like drugs, alcohol, certain kinds of unacceptable behaviors, X, Y, and Z. But okay, let's say, and I'm going to use this because I think this is very common and a lot of people come to me and ask me this. So, okay, let's say about having friends of the opposite sex, because I think that's a hot topic for a lot of people in their marriages.
Then there'd be boundaries around it. What's okay? Now, each person gets to have their own views on it.
Mm-hmm.
Each has their own values and morals and needs and wants. So let's say in your scenario, friends to you means that you guys go out dancing once a week. Another male, you guys go dancing. For some people, that's perfectly fine. For me, that wouldn't work. I wouldn't be in a relationship with somebody like that.
Right.
I would find that out beforehand.
Me neither, just so you know. Me neither.
Yeah. But so when it comes to things like that, it's a discussion of, okay, so what do you believe a friendship with a partner looks like? Sharing intimate information about our relationship, going to them as a person, a moral or emotional support if we're struggling. No, that's that's a boundary that can't be crossed. That I would not be okay with. Other people are like, what do you mean? That's fine. Okay, that's great that you think it's fine, but now you've just told me we're not a good fit.
Right.
Again, it comes back to, it's always the same thing. You need to talk and think about these things, but people don't. And then they get in the relationship and they go, well, what do I have to do? If I love them, I have to give into it. I have to accept this. I have to compromise. No, that is not love. That's codependency. That's the hallmark, is people fall into that trap. Call it love, call it compromise. It's codependency. It's love addiction, love avoidance.
Okay, so can you maybe give us 2 or 3, well, 3 or 5, 2, 3, 5, 7, whatever examples?
I'll give you a great story. I'll give you a great story that explains it perfectly.
Okay.
I grew up, my parents were always late. It drives me nuts. It makes me feel insecure, unwanted, neglected. It's an issue of mine. It's nobody else's issue, and it's mine. So when I start dating somebody, I tell them right up front, look, I don't do late. So if we make plans and we decide we're going to leave at 7, I leave at 7.
I think there's no reason for people to be late. It annoys me endlessly also.
Well, I'm going to tell you, here's the right way to say no.
Mm-hmm.
My ex-wife, when we first started dating, it was very early on, and we had the discussion. I explained that to her, and we were, she was over at the house getting ready to go out. We were going to leave at 7.
Right.
Well, 7 o'clock, she's still in there finishing up. Well, I walked down the stairs, out the door, got in my car, and left. And about 10 minutes later, I get a phone call, and she goes, where'd you go? I said, well, I'm going to the restaurant. And she goes, when'd you leave? And I said, about 10 minutes ago. She goes, why didn't you tell me? I said, I did. She goes, when? I said, earlier today when we made the plans. I said, I leave at 7. I guess you've decided you want to leave later or go alone, or maybe you've made other plans and didn't let me know. I don't know, but I hope you join me, but I'm going to be where we talked about. And she kind of went quiet, and she went, okay. See, I didn't run in there yelling, why are you late? You did this to me. I know how important this is to me. That's codependency. That's what we all do. What happened from that is she listened and she thought about it. And she went, you know what? I like going with him. He doesn't drink. I have a couple drinks. He'll drive. And you know what? He opens every car door. He opens the door when I come in. You know what? I think being on time works for me. The rest of our marriage, she was late twice. She made the choice. She changed her morals and values and decided, I like this. That's how you say no to somebody. You don't control them. You walk in your own morals and values. I didn't surprise her with it. I let her know what I was going to do. And then I followed through on it. That gave her a chance to honestly see who I am as a person and decide in that moment if she liked that or not. She decided that worked for her. And so she changed her behavior. That's how you compromise, not by telling them what they need to do, but by allowing them to think about it and make their own choice. But we don't do that. Codependency says, I'm going to run in there and scream at them for 10 minutes and blow the whole night because they were late and didn't listen. And we talked all day about how important it was to leave at 7. And that's where most relationships fail.
Okay, so to play devil's advocate, what would you advise people do their spouses, even if you do what you say and you laid that out, what would you say to people whose then spouses continue to be late and didn't pay any attention really to your needs or your wants?
Well, that would have shown up early on when you were dating.
Mm-hmm.
And if I had seen that she was always going to be late, I would have stopped dating her. That's what I mean. This stuff doesn't just happen. It's been going on. Now the problem is you're in the marriage. So for those listening that are in a marriage and have this problem,
right,
you have to decide, okay, in the end, do I have enough what I call reserves in me to put up with this without beating them over the head for it? So in other words, can I adjust my behavior to match them and be late and be okay with it? If you can't do it, then you stick to your guns and you just go, well, this is it. You have to accept it. You can't change them, and yelling at them won't change it. Then if it's so bad, if it's such an egregious thing, then maybe it's you realize, you know what? This is my fault. This person showed me who they were and I didn't see it. I chose to ignore it. I have to take responsibility. And if you decide to leave, that's because you made the choice. It was never them. They were never the problem. It was always us.
Well, and that's a really good point, right? That we tend to, and I think definitely the younger you are when you get married, the more you believe this to be true, or you are a little bit disillusional in your thoughts. We really have no power externally to change anyone else into anything else that we want them to be. And I think that this is one of the things that I tell my children constantly. You know, if you start to date somebody or you get into a relationship with someone, I tell myself, up until recently, you can't change them. If they are that person and they've shown you that you are that person, no matter how much you love them, help them, advise them, coerce them, manipulate them, they are still always at their essence going to be that person. And I think that this is a, really big thing to let go of. And even during divorce, when I'm talking to people who are already divorced and they're dealing with their exes and they're trying to still externally, years after they've been divorced from these people, control their ex's behaviors. And I tell them constantly, you can't. That's a ridiculous amount of energy you're wasting trying to do that. So what do you think, how do you think people need to let go of that kind of thought process that they have the ability to change another person or their ex?
Well, that's something called denial.
Yeah.
And it's rampant. Two things, shame and denial. Here's how it works. I work off of a 4-stage process. Every single one of us has been through trauma, through childhood. We've been through something. The second that happened, that when we're a kid, that initial trauma, it happens to us. That creates fear. Fear is one of 3 things. It's either the fear of rejection, the fear of inadequacy, or the fear of powerlessness. Think when you went through trauma, you felt completely rejected, inadequate, and powerless. Now, when we suffer these things as adults, what happens is we drop into shame. And shame is because we were powerless in the trauma, we feel worthless. And here's the key, and this is what nobody talks about. What we do with shame is to get our control back is we then pick people that will victimize us. We set it up ourselves.
Victim mentality, yes.
We literally choose our trauma and relive it over and over again. But we do that because now we're in control. Think of how many people after they get divorced, they go out and drink for a couple months and sleep around. Why? Because they feel rejected, inadequate, and powerless, and they victimize themselves, and they're sitting there going, I'll show them. See, now they're in control of the victimization. They're doing it to themselves. But since they don't want to admit that they're doing it to themselves, They drop into denial and say, she's the problem.
Right.
And that's the cycle that every single person goes through. They're stuck on the shame piece of creating their own victimhood because that's where they get their power back. They lost it. And think of how they do it, especially through divorce. They get sick, they get hurt, they pick another terrible relationship, because what happens when I'm the victim? Everybody comes to my rescue. Oh my God, you poor thing. Oh, you're sick again. Oh, another guy, another girl did it to you again. That's why we victimize ourselves, because it gives us power. Everybody wants to fix it for us. We don't have to. And
so what would you recommend? So say I was talking to somebody and they had ex who constantly played the victim in front of their children, in front of their friends. It was never, they never take responsibility for anything. They never accept blame for everything. It's always somebody else's fault. Someone else, did something to them. They're just stuck in this victim mentality. So if you're dealing with an ex who's like this, how do you go about kind of disengaging from this person and moving on without it affecting you?
Let me see if I can come up with an example. Or if you can come up with one where, a spouse does that, because that's such a broad topic. There's so many ways that happens.
Well, let's say that, because I think this is common too. You have two exes, right? So now you're divorced, you have children that you share, you have like minimal conversations with each other because you try not to for other reasons that are going on. But your children are coming home every weekend and your children are like, oh, poor daddy, oh, poor mommy. Their boyfriend dumped them, their girlfriend dumped them, they couldn't pay their bills, their car broke down, oh, they're just sitting there crying all the time, da 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 da. They're screaming and throwing things because X, Y, and Z, because it's always drama, right? It's also attached to that kind of victimization. So as the other ex who you're trying to disengage from this and you're trying to not be a part of this, but you're constantly hearing about it through your children or through your family or through your friends, because a lot of people, we're really not as kind of separated from our exes as we probably should be or could be for multiple different reasons, which is another issue. So how do you kind of turn that off and not let that affect you or bother you, or the crazy texts you get, or the kids crying because the parent is upset, or whatever it is?
Well, the first thing, if a parent's doing that, he's creating miniature codependents and love addicts. That's why they're doing it. The reason parents overshare information is because they haven't done the work on themselves. So they're reaching down to the kid, dumping all that emotion on them so the kid feels responsible to fix it. That's incredibly damaging to a child. So if you're the other parent, if you join that discussion and go, well, he should do this or she should do that, or you say anything, now you're doing what's called parental alienation. You're putting the kids in the middle, trying to decide between the two of you, and that's incredibly destructive. So you don't say a single word. What you do is you ignore everything the kids are saying and you attach to the feelings. Wow, it sounds like that's really hard on you. How do you feel about that? Just get the kids to talk about the impact on them. Don't say a single word about the spouse, ever, ever. No,
I think that's really, really good advice, Kenny.
You want to teach a kid not to be a codependent, then don't be one yourself. Yeah. What you do in that moment is you empathize with the child. What's going on? That sounds really tough. So mommy was really upset. Do you want to share? How did you feel about it? Don't pump them for information about what mommy did so you can use it against them in court and then go off and tell your friends what a jerk they are. That's the worst thing you can do. Right. The best thing you can do is just give your child a safe place to dump the emotion that the other parent has poisoned them with. Right. That's how you love them through it. Then you go off and you talk to your friend or therapist and go, God, man, that's really tough. I can feel what my kids are going through and I have no control over it. And what do I need to do for me? Well, now you have to look at your own self-care list. All right. Where am I not taking care of myself? Because if I'm giving this person that much power over me, that also tells me you haven't left the marriage. 10, 15 years later, if you're still angry at your spouse, you're still married to him. because this is how you can tell when a marriage is over, when they're no longer angry. That's when the marriage is over. I've seen people remarried 2 and 3 times and they're still angry at their first spouse. They have still not left them. The only time we ever get angry at somebody is if they matter to us. Because think about it, a stranger just don't care. But if it matters, you get upset.
So why do you think not being able to let go is so rampant amongst so many exes, right? We if I ask the average divorcee, they're like, oh yeah, I've let go, I'm dating so and so, I'm getting married to so and so. But when you, as you pointed out, when you talk to them further, you can still sense some kind of underlying something. And I am, I have multiple thoughts on this. One thought is that I think sometimes in relationships, people can't fully let go because in their head, like you said, they're codependent. But also, sometimes I feel it's almost like holding on to somebody by the shirt tails just in case you don't actually find anyone else better. Like that you have this like weird kind of plan B that you might actually go back to these people, or you need them for financial support or emotional support or something. But it's very, very detrimental, I think, to both people involved, and obviously very, very detrimental to the new future relationships those two people are trying to have with other people who they've now kind of dragged into this kind of unhealthy dynamic.
Well, there's really 2 reasons that people don't let go. And here's where the denial piece comes in, is they don't want to admit to themselves that they made a mistake. They don't want to admit their part in it. And because think about it, to let that go, we have to admit that I'm not perfect. And so there's literally a death that has to go through, a death of this vision I have of myself, right, that I made a mistake. I don't want to face that. And here's the key. The reason they don't do that is they haven't forgiven themselves. Everyone talks about forgiveness, of let them go, it's never about them. If you can't forgive somebody, it's because you haven't forgiven yourself for choosing them. Here's a perfect example. My second wife, the day I met her, I've said this once in my life, my gift is I feel emotion. A person walks in the room, I can tell you almost their life story by just looking at them, okay? The day I met my wife, I'm standing outside the restaurant. I turn around, she's walking towards me, she's about 15 feet away. And I said, oh my God, she's the devil.
And yet you still married her.
Yes, I married her. But here's the key. And it literally, the divorce, the withdrawal from the sickness in that marriage almost killed me. Literally, I was suicidal. There's a whole story. You can watch my videos and it's all over it. I don't want to get into it. But the key is this. I said, yes, I picked her. Until I could forgive me for making that choice, I could never forgive her. I love that woman to death. I almost died being in that relationship. And if I hadn't, I wouldn't have learned how all this works. I am eternally grateful for the hell we put each other through. But I couldn't see that. I could never accept how wonderful she is for me. So if there's any couple out there, anyone listening, and they still hate their spouse and aren't in this place, it's because you haven't been able to face your denial of the part you played, and you won't forgive yourself. The second you forgive yourself, you will forgive them, and it's all over. Then whatever they do, their craziness just doesn't bug you.
Right.
So that's the key. That's why they haven't let go more than anything. They haven't forgiven themselves.
No, I agree. And I feel like in a lot of couples, the person who actually is the guiltiest of the marriage demise, because I think you're right, both of you have blame, but I see a lot that one person tends to have a little bit more blame, but it's like a winning combination of demise of your marriage, right? But I tend to feel like the person who has the most blame is the one who has the hardest time letting go, and the one who has the hardest time forgiving themselves. Because on some level, even if they actually are, textbook narcissists, sociopaths, psychopaths, they still seem to be the one that has the hardest time.
Well, and the reason for that, what that shows me and tells me is how horrific the trauma was for them that they went through. and I don't judge them. I used to judge them negatively. I used to, condemn them until I realized they got that way because they were trained to be that way, the way they grew up and the things they went through. And they're hurting so heavily inside because of that 4-stage process, and that especially the shame piece. The reason they're so filled with anger and hatred and lack of forgiveness is that's a sign of how much damage they're trying to do to themselves. So my heart breaks for the one who is still stuck because they are in so much pain, and nobody teaches this stuff that I'm talking about. So they have no chance. They don't know. They don't have the information. You can't do better when you don't know better. And they're doing the best they can.
They're also the people who are least likely to get help, in my opinion.
And that's the false perception. Remember I said earlier, the false self. We've had to create this. And if we let that go, that's a death of us. But that's who I am. Right. That's who I've always been. You're asking me to give that up? Well, if I don't have that, what am I behind it? And that's what happened to me. That's how I saved my life, is I was at that place. And I realized what I'm doing is killing me. I can't do this anymore. This thing that I've been avoiding, because they all know it. They recognize I need to turn towards this one issue, but they're scared to death of it because no one's taught us how. And in that moment, I knew the only chance I had was if I turned towards it. And the second I did it, that's when my whole life changed. And that's the answer. And so that's what I teach people, how to walk through that process. Basically, the bottom line is this: your gift is in your trauma. And through Facebook and everything, what we're always told, think positive, just ignore all that stuff. No, that's why you're in pain. Until you turn towards the darkest part of yourself, until you can see that, you can't forgive yourself. But the second you do, it's like literally poof, it all goes away. Because now, like with my ex-wife, when I realized I was the devil, what I saw was the ugliness in me. I needed her to show me how absolutely manipulative and ugly I can be. And once I finally saw that in myself, I went, oh my God. Now I know, like I saw how I did it, certain words and certain ways I'd play nice, and everyone would think I'm a great guy. And I realized, no, I'm manipulating them. In that moment, I felt this deep, dark, crushing blow. And instantly I went, now I know. Like I started crying. I got this chill. I was free. I was like, oh my God, now I can do something about it. So every once in a while I'll feel this voice coming, and I just go, no, I don't need that anymore.
But I think that's
where you find it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think that, you have to really closely examine yourself, your behaviors, your tendencies and your own issues before you can move on and do anything else. Because, he who doesn't judge anyone or like fix themselves before they start judging everyone else never really gets very far in life, I don't believe.
But what's sad is we don't teach any of this. Did you ever take a single class in any school about emotions, about relationships, codependency?
No.
None of this.
I didn't know. I clearly didn't know what a narcissist was. I didn't know what a psychopath, a sociopath. I didn't know personality disorders, manipulation,
and every
personality, addiction, none of it.
Every single example we've ever seen, from our parents to movies, TVs, books, everything, is all this. That's all we know. And so that's what we're pursuing. Well, I say this in my speeches a lot. I'm like, I know you're English, but do you speak Russian?
No.
Well, would it be reasonable of me to take you to Moscow right now, plop you in the center, expect you to speak Russian fluently?
No, but it would be very cool if I could, and you would have been shocked right now if I was like speaking full-on Russian right this second.
It's impossible. And it would be absurd of me to expect that of you. And it's the exact same with relationships. No wonder we're all a train wreck. It could be no other way. We don't have the information.
Right.
We aren't taught it.
But I do say this. I mean, I do think that now, we are so fortunate, and I say this in a lot of my speeches, we are so fortunate now. We have this little thing called the World Wide Web. There is not as much excuse nowadays as it was in our day. Not that we, children now don't have these courses. We didn't have these courses. But you actually have every piece of information you need. And okay, it may be hard to navigate because there's so much of it. But what I did with starting my company, what I did, all my research on divorce and all these personality disorders and love addiction, all things you and I have spoken about. I mean, you can get on the internet and find what you need to find. And so if you're, to anyone out there who's in any situation with their ex, with their current partner, whatever they're doing, if you really feel that there's something wrong, there probably is. And if you're not really sure what that is, go on dreamsrecycled.com, look at our 4,000 blogs. Kenny blogs for us. He's awesome. We have 120 other expert bloggers. I blog, we all blog. But even just not on our website, there's Psychology Today. There's other really, really good places out there that if you feel like there's something wrong, you can Google it. You can look it up. And as Kenny said, denial and the whole kind of disillusion of what actually is going on is half of the battle. And so I always feel like information is power, and if you know what you're dealing with, you have a lot better chance of winning that battle, whether it's staying in a marriage or whether it's divorcing happier or whether it's the stage that Kenny and I in that we're divorced and looking, for new love and new relationships. And there's never any shame in getting any kind of help, whether it's with a coach like Kenny or a therapist or our website. It doesn't matter. Just there are resources out there and people should be finding them and using them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And if you'll humor me for a second, in this format people can't see my face, and so you can come across as condemning and judgmental, and I just want to say, the reason I know about this is my trauma was when I was 10 or 12 years old, I woke up in the middle of the night and found my mom passed out naked on a toilet. She was an alcoholic. And from that, because nobody taught her and nobody taught me how to deal with it, right, I became a sex addict, an alcoholic, a love addict, a spending addict, sugar addict, a tobacco addict. I filed bankruptcy. I went through 2 horrific divorces, child custody battle. I played 2 professional sports I never wanted to play, and I contemplated suicide. My life was a complete train wreck because I didn't have the tools. Now, lucky for me, I had an interest in trying to find out what happened to me. So since my 20s, I've been researching it, and it's taken me, I'm now 51, it's taken me all these years to finally figure out this is the cycle we all go through, whether it's an athlete that I work with, a business, a family. It's always this cycle. And so I don't want to come across as judging anybody, but what made me figure this stuff out is because I was in so much pain too. So I've suffered it. I'm coming from a place of I've hurt too. And so
which is great. And I actually think if you talk to 92% of all therapists, coaches, divorce experts, people like me who start divorce businesses, people like you who help other people, we are helpers because we have been there. We all have suffered through whatever it was in our lives, whether it's trauma, whether it's divorce, whether it's abuse. It doesn't, addiction, doesn't matter what it is. And I think that when things happen to you, you have 2 choices. You can either learn from them or you can lose from them. And I think people like you and I and many other people who we have on this podcast, and I know personally, we choose to not only learn from them, but we also try and teach other people through them. And that's a great thing that you're doing, Kenny. And I really, really appreciate you being here today. So why don't you tell us, where can people find you?
Well, LinkedIn, obviously, just Kenny Weiss. Facebook, you can go to Coach Kenny Weiss or my personal Facebook page. I do this all the time. I'll post anyone going through something, and people will private message me or leave a comment underneath, and I'll do videos based on a topic just for free. I just post them on my YouTube channel, which is same thing, Kenny Weiss. Those are the 3. I'm on Instagram. I know people. I know emotion. This whole internet stuff, this is not my dynamic. So tweeting and all that, I really struggle. My daughter showed me a little Snapchat, but it's above my pay grade. So I'll handle the emotional stuff. I'll leave the technical internet stuff to people like you. That's you're great at that. So those are the 3 main places you can find me.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. And we will be putting Kenny's information to contact him, anyone who's interested in learning more from him on our podcast. And we will also be posting the podcast and more of his information on dreamsrecycled.com under our blog section. We appreciate Kenny joining us, and we appreciate you listening. Tune in again next week when we have another awesome guest lined up. So thank you very much for joining us at Dreams Recycled podcast, and we wish you all happy Life's Recycled.